Okay, and it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Joe F. from Venice, California.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, my name is Joe Fitzgerald. I'm an alcoholic. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. Oh, God, I'm a little nervous. And we ate too much. We kept eating, and everybody was worried I had to go up and get dressed. And they were afraid I ate so much that I'd fall asleep. And I said probably the hard problem was I had to go up and I have to lay on the bed in order to get my pantyhose on, and I was afraid I'd fall asleep. And but I didn't fall asleep, praise the Lord. And I did get them on too. Anyway, they feel fabulous. They really do. They pull it all together. If you haven't worn any, try them, honey. And anyway, I'm glad I'm here. I would like to thank the committee for asking me to speak. What a privilege. What a privilege. I'm the class of 1975. I got sober in 1975. I was only 4 years old. I'm 34 years old now, and I feel fabulous, And I was 33 when I got sober. I'm 63 now, and I look fabulous. And I just turned 30 on March 27th, and I just want to tell you this little thing. On March 27th, when I turned 30, now it's been a lot of time in between, but when I made that call and when I walked through the doors of AA, I thought to myself, I remember my first meeting was 26th and Broadway in Santa Monica, and I remember raising my hand. They said, "Are there any alcoholics?" And I remember raising my hand, and then and I gave my name, and I thought, in my heart, I didn't tell anyone that I had gone with, the people that 12-stepped me. I didn't tell anyone, but I thought if I could just get a week, really, to be honest with you. I started drinking in third year of high school. I had never been sober a week until I came to AA. And I thought if I could just get a week. And then when I finally got that week, I thought they were giving those chips out. And I never wanted anything like I've wanted those chips. I hope you feel that way if you're new in AA. I said if I could those were my goals. If I could just get that 30-day chip. And and eventually I got it. And I got that 60-day chip. And so when I turned 30, I was just kind of overwhelmed with it, because I thought if you would have known me then, I was to get 30 days and now to get a 30-year cake. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. So God bless you. I hope you experience it. I came and I stayed. If you're new in AA, that's the easy way. It takes a lot of work, but that's the best way. And I didn't plan it that way. It's just the way I have done it. I do it one day at a time. As an old-timer said to me, he came up to me and he said, "Are you an he said, well, what's your name?" I said, he said, "Are you an alcoholic?" And I said, we had old-timers in those days. I don't consider myself an old-timer, but in those days, when you're newly sober, and they had like 5 or 10 or 15 years, it was like, oh my God, and this old-timer said, "Are you an alcoholic?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I wasn't 100% sure." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, what is your name?" And I said, "Well, my name is Joe Fitzgerald." "Fitzgerald, definitely you're an alcoholic." It's like, oh my God. It's like in the old days, if you were Irish, you were automatically an alcoholic. And then I remember this other guy said to me one night, it's those things I remember, and it was hard to comprehend, and this another old guy, we had a lot of old guys in AA in those days, and this old guy came up to me and he said, "It's one day at a time." And I said, "Well, okay, it's one day at a time." And then he looked at me and he said, "For the rest of your life." And I thought, oh God, no, I can't, it's too long, it'll be too long. But anyway, I've stayed. Anyway, What was the speaker this afternoon? Stacy. Sorry she's not here. I said I would mention her. Now that's all I'm going to say about her. Anyway, until a little later. And anyway. But the reality is I was born February 12th, 1942. I was born in Chicago. Anybody from Chicago? Praise the Lord. Great drinking town. Fabulous place. And, basically everything that I've learned about myself, I've actually learned in AA. I believe for myself, when I came through the doors in 1975, that I knew very little about myself. I didn't know a lot about Joe Fitzgerald, really. And so I've learned a lot in AA. I came stupid. I am so grateful. I didn't even know what alcoholism was. I had no idea. I just came very stupid. So basically everything that I've learned about myself, I've really learned in AA. And I'm so grateful. And I remember when people talked about being a middle child and feeling different, and I thought, oh my God, right on. I'm a middle child. I have an older brother and a younger sister. And, I was 4.5 pounds. And my mother said, you couldn't wait, and I was premature. And, my father worked on the railroad. And he always had his coveralls and his railroad hat. And she said, you couldn't wait. She said, you come flying out. And she said, the only difference between you and your brother. Now, in the 40s, we were born a little different, definitely. And she said, when you come flying out, you had a big pink bow in your hair. And it was like, oh, my God. And we're Irish and Italian, but we're not Jewish. And she said, when your father saw you, he said, oy vey. And she said, you lived up to the expectations of the pink bow. I became this very pretty little boy. Pretty was not in those days. And, God gave me a high-pitched voice. I had real big eyes, real long eyelashes. I wore long dresses and heels, and I twirled a lot. And, when I look back on my life, I remember I could still see the look on my father. My father used to come home from working on the railroad, and he'd look in there. Would my brother be playing baseball somewhere? And my sister would always be playing with her little dolls on the floor, and I was always in full drag, just twirling around. And he'd take one look at me, and he'd go out the back door, And I believe when I got sober, they talked about amends. My first amends was to my dad. I thought, I drove that man to alcoholism, And but I learned in AA, you do not drive people to alcoholism. He drove himself. He was an alcoholic. My mother was an alcoholic and a drug addict through prescriptions. My uncle died. My father's brother died of cirrhosis of the liver. My brother is still a practicing alcoholic. And now alcoholism, I'm a third-generation alcoholic. And now alcoholism has been carried now to the fourth generation. I have a great niece who lives in Chicago. She's been doing heroin since 14. She just celebrated a year, believe it or not. Bad news. The day after Mother's Day, but now she's doing heroin again. And she's back in the hospital. I just talked to them last weekend, and it's not easy. It's hard. But, if you're new in AA, I don't know. It's taken a lot of work for me to get from there to here. But I'll be honest with you. I was able to look at my family. I could not deny alcoholism is rampant in my family. So it has actually made my sobriety a lot easier because I didn't come from that no alcoholism. It's there. I'm a third-generation alcoholic, and I have not been able to forget it. I never will forget it, and I do not want to forget it. So it's helped me stay sober. I know I'm not here by mistake. That's something that I know in my heart. I'm not here by mistake. So anyway, I gave life my best shot. The way I looked and the way I sounded created a lot of problems for me. What time am I supposed to stop? It's about midnight. Right on. And you'll probably be the last one still here, but I'll keep on talking. There may be a surprise after the meeting, too. One never knows, In the good old days, I used to wait for last call. Who's ever on the right or the left was the lucky one, And that's just the way it worked, my dear. And There's always new adventures in sobriety. Anyway, I better praise the Lord is right. Anyway, and the men, the longer I stay sober, the men are getting better looking. The women are gorgeous, but I want to wear their clothes. Oh, God. Anyway, let me get on my story, Anyway, so I gave life my best shot. The way I looked and the way I sounded created a lot of problems for me, really, when you look back. And, I did what I had to do. I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous that we are survivors. And I do, honestly, in my heart, I honestly believe that. I believe that we're survivors for a lot of things, good, bad, or indifferent. And the reality is, I got through school, and I hated school because they always called me names and made fun of me and whatever. I didn't have a lot of friends. I played with girls a lot. Really, we had a lot in common, and they didn't call me names, and I was prettier than most of them. In the 40s and the 50s, the girls didn't wear makeup, and I was very pretty. And anyway, and the reality is, I learned very early in that family that I knew we didn't have a lot. We were poor. We were definitely poor. And the reality is I learned in that family if you wanted any extras in life, you have to go to work. And I've actually got my first job when I was in the 4th grade. I got a paper route. And I have never been unemployed. I've always worked. And I'm so grateful. That's what I learned that in the family. I don't think they told me I had to do that, but I did. And I've always worked. And, what happened to us is my parents finally got divorced when I was I don't know ages, but I was in the 5th grade when my parents got divorced. And we moved from the north side of Chicago to the south side of Chicago, and we moved to a place called the Bridgeport Housing Projects. And for us, that was a step up. I am so grateful. I loved the housing project. It was a great life, and we had a little townhouse, all concrete, and 2 bedrooms upstairs and a bathroom and a little living room and kitchen downstairs, and it was great. And, in my whole life, I've always wanted better things for my family. And I'm the one that, through a series of little jobs, here and there, I ended up getting a job at the A&P supermarket carrying groceries on Thursday night, Friday night, and all day on Saturday. And that's when our lives changed a great deal, because I was the one that walked into born in Bridgeport. Mayor Daley is from Bridgeport. He was, Mayor Daley from 1,000 years ago. And we got him in, and I guess his son is still there. And the reality is, I walked into this on 32nd and Halsted Street, a store called Major Appliance. I'll never forget it. I said to the man, I want to buy my mother a toaster. We never had a pop-up toaster. We never had a lot of stuff. And I said, what do I do to get this toaster for my mother as a gift? He said, you make the payments, and when it's paid, I'll give it to you. I said, that's okay. And I made the payments, and eventually I got the toaster. And then eventually I bought curtains, and I bought our first fabulous chrome and formica. It's in now. Chrome and formica kitchen table with 6 chairs and a window fan, and it was so shiny in our kitchen. It looked like a new Cadillac. It was so fabulous. And everything I've learned, I really learned from the movies, and I learned that people that had better things had end tables, lamps, and a coffee table. I bought 1 table at a time, 1 lamp at a time. I bought the coffee table. I bought dishes, Melmac, because periodically my father would come back and my mother would throw them through the air, and they did not break, praise the Lord. And, but whatever, And I cleaned house a lot. I washed clothes and whatever. But you know what? When I look back, life was pretty good. It wasn't bad. I was just, I was a good kid. And, I didn't know about drugs and alcohol. I didn't know about drugs, I saw alcoholism in my family, but, to be honest with you, it's like I didn't really want to drink. Drinking was not one of my things that I thought of. And, we like ice cream, milkshake, French fries, but alcohol was not at the top of my list. And I was, anyway, so the reality is, what happened is, eventually, I don't know about you, but I believe long before I found alcohol, I think it's so important if you're new in AA or even if you're old in AA. The reality is I look back on my life and I realized long before I found my drink. Actually, I started drinking in third year of high school. But long before I found alcohol, I was able to look back on my life and realize that I was not pleased to be in AA, being an alcoholic. But the reality is when I was able to look back on my life, I realized that I said one time at the meeting to myself, I said to God, thank you, God, for alcohol and all the drugs, whatever I had to do to get here, because I believed that I needed it. I was able to look back on my life and say, when I started, it was a medicine. It was a great medicine for me, and I actually started that in third year high school. But something happened to me in the 8th grade, and I'll never forget it, and it's something that has stayed with me for a long, long time. And the reality is, in Chicago, now I didn't know a lot about girls. In fact, I liked girls. I really did. I wanted to be one. But anyway, God didn't do that. But the only thing I knew about girls, and I had girlfriends, believe it or not, I had crushes on girls, the only thing I knew about girls is how girls wore babushkas. And girls, if some of you may remember, people back east, they wore babushkas. And we remember we all went to Catholic school. And the girls that I associate with wore babushkas. And the only thing that I knew is the good little Catholic girls, they wore their babushka like this. Now, when you saw the little Catholic girl, she would have her babushka like this. They looked like little nuns. No makeup. They look little nuns. She could be my friend. She's a good girl, a real good girl. And a girl that was not so good would have it back just a little bit like this and have it on her chin. And you knew she's a little bad, but she could be my friend. She's a little bad, but she can be my friend. But a real bad girl would have it or not, have it in her mouth like this, have it way back. She'd have her hair in a ponytail, and she'd have makeup on. And I don't know what it was. Maybe that was the beginning of alcoholism or whatever, but I would actually see a bad girl coming down the street. I was terrified of the bad girls. Something about that. When I saw the bad girl, I would actually cross the street and go around her. And then a little later on in life, I realized I wanted to be a bad girl. And, and the bad girls were doing all the things I didn't even know about yet, but I wanted to do. But the reality is, in the 8th grade, I had my first male friend. His name was Donnie T., and I'll never forget him. I still remember where he lived in the housing project. And Donnie wanted to make it with this bad girl, and her girlfriend wanted me. And he said, Joe, you got to do it. And I liked Donnie a little more than being my friend. And, and I didn't know about the big book or the 12 and 12 then, but I was willing to go to any length to be his friend. And we ended up in a junkyard one night in a bandit truck. Now, these girls, I'd never seen these girls before, and these girls brought little candles. Now, these girls had been around the block a couple of times, and that girl was so excited. Now, I am a little short. I was actually a short little boy until second year of high school. I actually got this tall. My family thought, he is going to be a midget. He's so short. And I had never seen that girl before in my life. That girl, when I saw her that night, she was so big and so excited and to see me that Donnie and his girlfriend stayed in the front of the truck, and I call her the Jolly Green Giant. She went running to the back of the truck. She was so excited to see me, and it was one of the slowest walks I have ever taken in my life. And to be honest with you, in all my alcoholism, I have never experienced more fear or terror that I experienced that very night in that truck. And by the time I got back there, they had blown their candle out. And I got somewhere near her, and she blew our candle out. Now, I knew what I was supposed to do. I was standing. I am low to the ground. I started to prepare myself because I knew what I was going to do. I was a little boy. I knew what little boys were supposed to do. But I thought, I've got to check it out and see what's going on in here. And I just started feeling around the truck. I couldn't see anything. I just started feeling around that truck. I touched something, and it was a little furry, and I let out a scream. I said, oh my God, there's an animal in here, and the rest is history, We got dressed real quick, and the girls went that way, Donnie went that way, and I went that way, and I've never seen any of them since, and And I never did get myself in that situation again. And, I don't know about you, but jitterbug was real popular in those days, and that was my first fix. I became the jitterbug king of Bridgeport. I loved dancing, and girls were wearing a lot of petticoats and a lot of chiffon in those days, and I would throw them through the air and twirl them. I remember that chiffon and those petticoats would go flying, and those girls would say, "Oh, don't do that." I'd say, "Honey, get your hands off of it and let them see it," and we had a ball. We had a ball. It was, when I look back on my life, it was the best time of my life in my teens. I had a ball, and I was the kind of guy, when I walked through the doors of AA, my self-loathing, I had tried a lot of suicide before I got here. And unfortunately, I did not, fortunately for me, I did not die. I'm so grateful. But my self-loathing was so bad by the time I got here that I felt so bad about myself. And I remember at one point in time, my mother had gone through all those old pictures and stuff, and she gave me a whole box of stuff. She said, "This belongs to you." And I looked back, and I saw this handsome young boy, and just such a handsome young boy, and all these beautiful girls, and you bought them wrist corsages, and you took them for hamburgers and French fries afterward, and milkshakes. And I remember going to the houses to get these girls, and the fathers would always look at me, the father and mother. In those days, it was different, and I'd take her to a dance or whatever, and fathers would look at their beautiful daughter, and then they'd take one look at me, and I'd say to the father, "Sir, what time would you like your daughter home?" And the father would always say to me, "You could keep her out all night," And I thought, oh, wow, but they knew there's nothing going to happen with their daughter with this one, and she'll come home with sore feet, or maybe her chiffon will be twisted a little bit, but no problem, and I didn't know that then, but I was a good boy, really, good boy. So anyway, what happened is I started running around with this group of rich Lithuanian girls. And their father had new cars all the time. We'd wear our babushkas. I was prettier than all of them. And we'd drive around in Chicago, and a group of guys wanted to get to know these group of girls. And the girls said, "We will have nothing to do with you unless you become Joe's friend." And they said, "We don't have a problem with Joe." And the girls told me, "Could you drink beer?" Those boys drink beer. And I said, "Well, I've had some beer at home." It wasn't a thing I worried about. They said, "Could you drink 3 quarts? The boys drink 3 quarts. I said, "Well, I'll try." And to make a long story short, I did. I drank 3 quarts, and I didn't have a problem with it. It worked great. And we used to go to bowling alleys a lot and drink beer and whatever. And eventually what happened is I kind of fell in love with one of those boys. And nothing happened, but that was my first inkling that something was different about me. And I dated my last girlfriend when I was 19. And what happened is my mother and I, my brother got married. My sister got pregnant, married at 16. My mother and I moved out of the housing project to a small 1-bedroom apartment. My mother met someone. She didn't come home anymore. So I went to live with that Lithuanian family, one of the girls I ran around with. And I had already dropped out of high school. I was running with that group of guys and drinking and working, and I had to go and live with that Lithuanian family. And then they said, "You can come and stay here, but you have to go back to high school and get your diploma." So I went back to high school, and then they saw I didn't have a flair for schooling, but I had a flair for hair, believe it or not. My adopted sisters would say, "Joe, help me roll my hair." And I'd roll their rollers. They wore rollers every night to go to bed. So I'd roll their hair. They encouraged me to go to beauty school, and eventually I became a hairdresser. And thank God, because working was very difficult, working normal jobs. And anyway, so what happened is I found alcohol, dated my last girlfriend when I was 19. I finally came out on the streets of Chicago, a place called Bughouse Square, and I dated my last girlfriend, and that's where one night I dropped her off around 1 in the morning, and I always parked by this park. I didn't know what's happening. We don't know, but we know. And I saw all these guys walking around, and I've been seeing them for a while, and I didn't go back to my car. I just started walking around the park and stopped this guy, and I said, "I do not know what's going on here. Can you tell me?" He said, "You don't know?" And I said, "Well, not really." And so he said, "Give me a few minutes." And he was a hustler, and he got rid of his trick. And he told me, we went out to breakfast that night, and he told what I assumed. He said, "You're gay." He told me I was gay. And he said, "What you have to do is," I became a hustler. I didn't know there was such another way. But anyway, I became a hustler. I hustled this old man the next night. I made $10. I was a high roller in those days. And, he got a hotel room, and he probably was 30 years old. I was 19 and gorgeous. And I had $10 in one hand, and he took his clothes off, and I thought, I'm out of this room. And I went running out of there with my $10, and I thought, if this is what you have to do to be gay, I'll be a free hustler. So I became a free hustler at Bug House Square, and I did very well. I was very popular, and they eventually got very tired of me, and they took me to my first gay bar, which was called the Front Page. And that's where my whole life changed. That's where I found alcohol and men and cigarettes, and it worked real well. Eventually I met Mr. Alcoholic, and we, I believe that we're drawn to alcoholics. Anybody nice, forget it. Alcoholic, my savior. And, it was a very violent relationship. And I'd throw him out, he'd come back. I'd throw him out, he'd come back. And what happened, we moved out to California in 1967 from Chicago. And when we moved out to California, I said in 1967, I didn't tell him that, but we lived in Brentwood on Montana. And he had a big high-powered job. And I got a job I went back to beauty school to be a hairdresser again. And eventually I became a hairdresser again. But the reality is, I didn't tell him that, but I said there will be no more physical violence. I didn't want to fight anymore. I was tired. I had had it. We had a lot of bad times. And so what happened is that last year, in 1968, I did something I never did before. I left that relationship. I walked out of that house, left the cats, left the furniture, left the dishes, and I ended up on 10th and Montana in Santa Monica. And a 3-little room. My 3 little rooms were no bigger than not even quite big at this stage. It was so small. It was a very small little apartment. And that's for me where I crossed the invisible line. That's when I started. My aunt and uncle lived out here, my father's sister. My uncle was a practicing alcoholic. He worked in real estate. He got a lot of free booze. My aunt came one night, brought me 8 bottles of bourbon. She brought me a little Waterford glass, and she said, I said, Aunt Helen, I hate straight booze. I like beer and mixed drinks. She said, you will acquire a taste. And I thought, oh, well, Miss Perfect. She was she should have been an alcoholic. She didn't drink enough. She's a bad Al-Anon. And the reality is, and what happened is my friends that had migrated out here, now that my friend was out of the picture, they came to my apartment and they brought me a rolling machine and marijuana. They brought me, I was already on Valium, Librium from the doctor. They brought me diet pills. I said, what would I need a diet pill for? They said, we only take these on early Saturday morning around 3, 4, or 5 when we drive to Palm Springs for the weekend. It keeps you awake. I was good at following direction. I thought, oh, great, okay, I'll take them. And then they brought me emo nitrate. I said, what's this for? They said it's for sex, dancing, and when you want your long hair to fluff up a little bit. And I thought, oh, my dear, And so anyway, within a week, I got hooked on all that stuff. And what happened is Aunt Helen left that night, and, I used, believe it or not, don't ask me afterward who Edie Gourmet is, but I used to play my Edie Gourmet and Barbra Streisand records, and at this point in time, I was working at Hughes Helicopter, believe it or not. I got a job there before I eventually went back into hairdressing, and so I would work 4 to 11. I'd come home and get ready to go out, and I remember when Aunt Helen left that night, that little Waterford glass was so small that I like quantity, not quality, and I loved alcohol. I just like quantity. And what happened is I was in the bathtub playing my Edie Gourmet and Barbra Streisand records, getting ready to go out, and I thought this little glass is not working too well because I kept getting out of the tub and refilling it and getting back in the tub, and I thought, I need a bigger glass. So I went to my kitchen cupboard, and there was a 4-cup Pyrex measuring cup. And I thought, now, you know what? That's a good glass because it has a good handle. I could hold it real good. I never spilled any booze because I was still smoking a lot of marijuana. And I would kind of come to my apartment sometimes and I'd look in the ashtray and there'd be like 5 new lit cigarettes in the ashtray. And I'd say to myself, oh my God, who's in my apartment? And, well, there was no one in my apartment, just that I would light one up and then I'd forget, and then I'd light another one up and I'd light another one up, and I'd say to myself sometimes, well, did I put my drink down? I don't remember. But when I put this down, Oh, I heard it. I put my drink down. I could hear it. I could hear sounds. I couldn't see much, but I could hear it sound. Put my drink down. I knew it was okay. And one thing about this glass, when you put it at the side of the bathtub now, I used to pass out a lot in the bathtub. And the water I create little tidal waves. And it would go, everything that used to be on the side of the bathtub would kind of fall on the floor and break and whatever. Well, when I found this glass, nothing broke anymore. It just stayed there, and it was always ready for me. And so if you're drinking anything like this, my friends would see me out sometimes. They say, Joe, how much did you drink? I said, I only had 3, 4, or 5, of these. It's amazing. It's just amazing. I drank like this all the way until I came through the doors of AA. And, what does a chicken have to do with sobriety? Not a whole lot, but a lot about alcoholism, because it's only 10 o'clock at night. I can barely stand. I'm so drunk. But I thought, if I eat something, you've got to coat your stomach. My aunt told me you have to coat your stomach. I thought if I eat something, I'll feel better so I could finish getting ready to go out. So I get a chicken, and I fire up my little broilers. In those days, I turn the oven on and get that broiler going. And if you're a good alcoholic, you throw the chicken in the broiler. And what do? You pass out on the kitchen floor, and you come to about an hour or two later, and black smoke is always billowing all over your apartment. And the reality is eventually I got better things. Eventually I became a hairdresser again in Beverly Hills, and eventually I moved to bigger apartments. And what happened is I left Santa Monica because I had actually slept with everybody in Santa Monica. I'm a one-nighter. And we weren't getting any new bartenders and no tours, so I thought, I'm out of here. So I moved to West Hollywood, and I got bigger apartments and bigger stoves. And, but you know what? Alcohol was working real well. It was working real well. And I went to work. I had to go to work every day. When you want drugs, when you want alcohol, you got to have the money. I couldn't call my family. I was self-supporting, and if anything, I would help them. So what happened is to make a long story short, my father moved out. The man that I have had very little relationship. And another thing, which is not normal, and I always have to remember this too, you have to remember the worst thing to make you realize that you can never go back to drinking. I remember in Santa Monica, in that little apartment, that I had a coffee table. It was yay long and yay wide. It was Formica. Remember now, in the late 60s, early 70s, we just sat on the floor. No matter what kind of furniture you had, we just sat on the floor. We shared everything. And I would come home on a Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and all my friends lived in West Hollywood in those days, so they would go to the bars, bring a trick over, whatever. But they knew if they didn't come to my place in Santa Monica that Sunday, they'd never be able to go to the beach. So they would all come to my little room, and we'd wake up like Sunday morning. There'd be like 8 or 9 people in my little room. And one thing I got to say, I always learned. I love to cook. And I always ate. I think that's what kept me going all those years from the alcoholism was food. At least I ate. I didn't starve. And so I remember this one Saturday I bought a 12-pound turkey at the market across the street. And I remember Sunday morning I was always so out of it. And we were already smoking marijuana now, going to the beach. And my friends would say, Joe, let's go. And, I knew if I made something that later when we come home, we'll have something to eat. So I remember I kind of came to, and I looked in this bowl. I had this bowl. It was so big, and I thought, oh, my God, it looked like I had 12 pounds of dressing, and I thought, oh, my God, what am I going to do with it? So I got a rubber mallet out, and I just started stuffing that little 12-pound bird. And by the time I rolled him into the oven, he looked like 26 pounds. He was and I put him in the oven, and we went off to the beach, and we had a fabulous time. We were there all day smoking and drinking and smoking marijuana, and didn't do a lot of drugs. And by the time we came home, I remember we were all sitting around that coffee table. Now we were drinking more and smoking marijuana, and we heard an explosion. Now an explosion in the late 60s, early 70s, we didn't have loud noises in those days. We heard a poof, and all of a sudden, I swear to God, we were sitting on the floor around that Formica coffee table, and this bird come flying out of the kitchen, and he landed on the Formica coffee table, and he just kind of slid in the middle. And I remember now we didn't talk a lot in those days either, and all my friends went, and I thought, oh my God, this is some kind of new bird. It just comes out when it's ready. I didn't know. We didn't have that thing that pops up. I thought, this is something new. It just, when it's ready, it lands on the table. And I thought, well, I got to get up and I got the plates and the silverware. And actually, we had a great dinner. He blew his ass off in the kitchen. It was all over the wall and whatever. But we ate it. It was fabulous, And so eventually I moved out of West Hollywood moved out of Santa Monica. And I moved to West Hollywood. Now I'm a hairdresser in Beverly Hills. And I was buying a lot of fancy furniture. I love silver and crystal, and I like good things. And I bought a 73 Coupe de Ville, and things were going good. But I was in the throes of alcoholism, unfortunately. But I'm a functioning alcoholic. And what happened is my father, who I had never had much of a relationship, moved out here. He was drinking 7 days a week, and he said, Joe, he had been here one Christmas. It was like 89. We had gone down to the beach and rode along Venice Beach and all that. And he went back to Chicago on a Sunday. He got off the plane. It was like 22 below zero. He called me from the airport. He said, Joe, I'm going to work tomorrow and I'm going to retire. He said, because if I retire in Chicago, I am drunk 7 days a week. Now, I'm working. He said, but if I retire, I will be drunk 24 hours a day. And he said, your brother and sister are busy raising their children. If I come to California, you'll have time for me. We'll go bicycling and go for hamburgers, and you'll do things with me. And so we came to California. He stayed with me for about 3 months, got rid of all his furniture, and came to California. We got him an apartment at Park La Brea. And my father, now remember, he worked on the railroad. Now he had a couple of bucks. He had quit. He never drove anymore, because he had an accident drinking. He said, as long as I drink, I will never drive again, and he never did. And what happened is he got this apartment at Park La Brea. Now I had a gorgeous apartment. He said, Joe, he loved the way my apartment looked. He said, I want my apartment to look just like yours. Get your decorator friends over here. And well, I got my decorator friends. We went running over to Park La Brea, and we decorated. For a guy on the railroad, he had butter yellow carpet and palm trees and a crystal chandelier, and it was unbelievable. It looked fabulous, but now when I look back, it looked very gay, very gay. And the women at Park La Brea now had never seen an older man come to Park La Brea and have such a fabulous-looking apartment. The women used to, Walter, can I have my lady friend see your beautiful apartment? And he'd say, I'd call him some days from work at the beauty shop, and he'd say, Joe, I can't talk. The lady next door, she brought a couple of her friends. I'm giving a tour of my apartment. I'll talk to you later. And boom, he'd hang up. And I bought him a bicycle. I bought him a Spalding's bag. He was playing tennis every day, and it was just unbelievable. And he wasn't drinking anymore. And I used to go over, and he liked to cook. And I would go over, and he'd always be in the kitchen doing something. And the top of his head was here. And I would always kind of throw my arms around him. He had a little bit of a belly. And I'd throw my arms around him. I'd always kiss him at the top of his head like this. And he'd say, what are you doing? And anyway, I'm so grateful I did it. He was such a great guy. And he said to me one time in his apartment, he said, Joe, you remind me so much of me. It's unbelievable. And I thought, does he know what he just said? But you know what? He had meant nothing about being gay. He meant I was a lot like him in many ways, and I think the alcoholism, he could see it. So what happened is he had a massive heart attack, and he died. And I was so angry with God. That was the hardest time in my life. If God would have came to me, now I tried a lot of suicide, and I just didn't die. And if God would have came to me, and that's the way, it doesn't work that way. But God would have came to me and said, it's either you or him, I would have said, take me. Because my life was over. Literally, my life was over. I was going down the tubes. Alcoholism was killing me. But it doesn't work that way. And I had 8 more months of drinking. And when I cried out this last time, now I inherited, believe it or not, $8,200 from my father, which was a lot of money in those days. I did not need the money. I was doing very well. But I remember my father told me, you're going to get a little bit of money one day. Your brother and sister need the money for their children, but you don't. You save the money. You can spend the interest, but not the principal, because you're going to be alone the rest of your life, and you're going to need money. And so, thank God, when he died, I never did spend principal. I never did spend it. It was in a CD. So, what happened is I had 8 more months of drinking, and just like any other drunk, the last drunk, I was so drunk. I had closed the bars. I'd been on the streets. I came home around 3:30 that morning, and I remember crying out. I said, God, someone. I didn't know it was alcoholism. I thought at that point in time I was just losing my mind or I was going to have a nervous breakdown. I could not release my father. I was so angry that God took him. And I remember crying out. I said, Dad. And I thought of my father, and I thought of my Irish uncle, Uncle John. I love my uncle. And I thought of my Irish grandmother, Sadie, the woman I loved the most. I said, Dad, Graham, Uncle John, help me. I think I'm losing my mind or having a nervous breakdown. I don't know what's happening. And I remember I went to bed, and the next day I woke up, I thought of AA. And they had already been doing the 20 questions, believe it or not, on TV in the early 70s. And I would have my father over, my aunt and uncle. I lived in a building in West Hollywood. There were 10 units. Eventually, 6 of us got 10 single men. Eventually, 6 of us came to AA on our own. No one brought each other. We all eventually came to AA. And I remember when I went to work that day, I woke up. I went to my first house. Now, I had drank myself out of the hair business. You know, I couldn't cope with it anymore because there was a lot of drugs and booze in Beverly Hills. The women all had their own bottles. They had their name on them, a lot of drugs. I didn't do a lot of drugs because alcohol worked real well. But I remember I came to one time in the beauty shop and I felt this swirling motion. I thought, oh my God, we must be having an earthquake. You know, and then I realized I heard this woman in the background. I heard this voice, this woman saying, Mr. Joseph! Mr. Joseph, it sounded so loud. And I kind of woke up and I thought, oh my God, I'm in the beauty shop and I had this brush that was going around and around and I thought, I heard this woman saying, Mr. Joseph, my beehive is a little bit on an angle, you know, and I said, oh, shut up, don't even worry, just turn your head a little bit, you know, and I thought, I'm out of here. So if you ever seen anyone with a beehive sideways, that was one of mine. They were walking around like this. But I just got out of it, and I'm the only hairdresser. I start cleaning beauty shops, believe it or not, and eventually I start cleaning private homes. I love cleaning, believe it or not. I love cleaning. I'm a cleaner. And eventually I work now. I've been doing it for almost 40 years, believe it or not. And I wear these huge feather dusters, and I rollerblade my way through these huge mansions, and I make a lot of money. It's made me very rich. And the reality is what happened is I called AA. And I called AA that Wednesday. I went to work. I was in the Valley, and I called AA, and I said to this woman, I went to my first customer in the Valley. I picked up the phone. I called AA, and I said to the woman, someone answered. I still don't know who answered, but this woman, I said, how long are you going to be there? I thought she said all day and all night. I said, I'll talk to you later. I hung up, did all my houses that day, went home, cleaned my apartment, took a bath, and I called AA 11:30 that night. A woman answered again. She said, will you be up in an hour? I will have a man call you. I said, I'm here waiting. I did not know what I was waiting for. I did not know what AA was all about, but I made that call. And an hour later, a man called Donald Madden had called me on the telephone. He said, and the name of the game is Yes. He said, are you okay? And I said, yes. Have you been drinking? I said, no. He said, you have to go to a meeting tomorrow. I said, yes. Be at my house at 7 o'clock. I said, yes. And you know, that's the miracle. The next day was on a Thursday. I did all my house cleaning. I came home. I remember getting ready to go over to his house. And my friends now, 3 of my friends that lived in 3 of those apartments came up to my apartment and they all had their drinks and I was getting all dressed up and they said, oh my God, where are you going so early? And I said, I bet you'll never guess where I'm going. And they said, well, you're the funny one in the building. You always do funny things. Where are you going? I said, I'm going to an AA meeting. And they kind of looked at each other and they said, you really did it this time. And they turned around and left. And I thought, oh my God, what did I do? You know, what did I do? And but anyway, I finished getting dressed. I got in my 73 Coupe de Ville, drove out of there, and I drove over to his house. Now, he was an interior decorator, believe it or not. And I pulled in his driveway, and he had, now I didn't know what an alcoholic looked like, what they had, whatever. And I pulled in his driveway, and I noticed he had a brand new 1975 Eldorado convertible. The top was down. And just for a half a second, it went through my mind. I thought, my God, these alcoholics are doing pretty good. So anyway, I went in his house, and I was standing in the doorway, and he said to me, you know, by the way, we don't drink. And I said, okay. And he said, do you do any other things? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, do you ever take a pill? I said, oh, pills. I do take pills. I told him I'm Valium, Librium, doctor prescribed. And I said, I do take diet pills when I'm driving to Palm Springs at 4, 5, 6 in the morning, Saturday morning. And then I do smoke marijuana, but usually on my way out of my apartment, because if I smoke it too soon, I'll still be in the tub at 2:30 in the morning, and I'll having a fabulous time. And then I said, I do use poppers, nitrate, just for sex dancing, and I don't want my long hair to fluff up a little bit. And he said, And then he looked at me and he said, we don't do any of that either. And I felt like at that point in time that I was standing on a rug and he had just pulled it. And I thought, I didn't know what, AA was so different in those days. I said, well, if that's what you have to do, I'll have to do it. So I was so grateful, because when I went home, I called my neighbors, and they just, they're all alcoholic. And so they came and took the marijuana and took the pills and took the poppers and my rolling machine. They even wanted to take my Waterford wine glasses. I said, no way, I'm not going that far. And so the reality is, I went to AA. My first meeting was 26 in Broadway, and this is what he told me. He said, did you drink every day? I said, yes, I did. I was very honest. I did not know you. I didn't know you should lie. I didn't want to lie, but people do lie, but I was not lying. I said, yes, I drank every day. I suggest if you drank every day, you have to go to a meeting every day. And if you had a commitment at a meeting, maybe you'd go back. You know what? And it made sense to me. And, and it took, getting that first commitment, asking that guy if I could help set up chairs was the hardest thing I had to do. And then I got other commitments. And being the house cleaner, I was actually the only house cleaner that ever cleaned. In the old days, in my 73 Coupe de Ville, I popped that trunk open. The trunks were enormous in those days. I'd have buckets and rags and window Ouijas and vacuum cleaners. And in the old days, I would go and clean for poor people in a way. And they would say, oh, my God, my cleaning lady has a better car than we do, And, that was my claim to fame. And but I jumped into AA. And I used to clean. I used to say I didn't want anything with a title. Just let me. We wash cups a lot. I spent a lot of time in the kitchen. I'd wash the windows and wipe the tables. And they'd say, oh, my God, look at the rug. We don't have a vacuum. I said, no problem. I have a vacuum cleaner in the trunk of my car. I'd get it out, vacuum all the carpets and whatever. I mean, those AA meetings were just sparkling when I got commitments. And I loved it. And I had a few dollars. I would bring more food. You get the food commitment. And in the old days, believe it or not, people would go to AA meetings. Where's the best food? Joe, he's catering. I used to put another $30 into the thing, and cookies and cakes, and we love sweets. And I just kind of threw myself into AA, and I loved it. And believe it or not, when I was 3 months sober, I thought, I loved Donald Madden. He was my best introduction to AA. But the reality is, I could not deal with men, and really that was part of my problem. So I couldn't relate to him. So I eventually got a woman. I was 3 months sober. We had this little art lady in Beverly Hills, and she used to have long blonde hair and twist it up on top, and Gucci bags and Gucci shoes. And I used to say, I said to my friend, but I stuck with the winners. We were all newly sober. We all went to meetings. We all had commitment. We all took newcomers out afterward for coffee and cake and whatever. And we were just very busy, very busy. And I remember my friend said, you better get a sponsor. You better get a sponsor. And I said, I'm going to ask Molly to be my sponsor. Well, you better go and ask her. And they kind of pushed me. And I remember I sat behind her at 2+2 on a Tuesday, and then we went to Brentwood on Thursday, and there she was. She was the main speaker on Thursday. She had 5 years of sobriety. And I remember standing in line to thank her afterward. And I said to my friends, God, I have to ask Molly. You better ask her. You better ask her. And I went up to her after the meeting, and she didn't know me from Adam, but I said to her, Molly, would you be my sponsor? And she looked at me and she said, I would love to be your sponsor. And I didn't tell her then. She said, I'm going away. I'll be gone for a week, but she was a little art lady, and she said, come to my gallery on Saturday, and I want to talk to you because I'm going to worry about you if I don't see you. And I thought, oh my dear, she doesn't even know me, and she's already worrying about me. So I remember when we left Brentwood that Thursday, I was like Cheetah Rivera in West Side Story. I was dancing down the street. I got a sponsor. It was fabulous. I was so happy. I finally made that connection. And, and she was my sponsor for my first 16 months of sobriety, and I loved it. And she was exactly what I needed. Exactly what I needed. I stayed real committed to AA. I went to Westwood office. I had 6 months of sobriety. I remember calling Westwood office. I wanted to help alcoholics. I really do. And this is how the program, you give it away. Even in the early days, I was exact. You know what? When I was new, someone with 30 years, I think, oh, praise the Lord, but no way. I could not think of being sober. I don't ever want to be sober that long. It was just too far away. But someone in their year of sobriety or 60 days or 90 days, I could understand that much more. So I remember calling Westwood office. I was 6 months sober, and I said to the lady, I want to help alcoholics. And she said, well, how much sobriety do you have? And I said, well, I have 6 months. Oh, 6 months, she said. We really require a year. But she said, if you come over, I'll interview you, and we'll see if we can give you the job every other Sunday. And I thought, boy, I'm going to go over there. I cleaned my Cadillac and got all dressed up, and I went driving over to Westwood. And I didn't realize they were really desperate for phone operators. But, she said, well, we'll give you a try. And I stayed there for like 6 years, every other Sunday. And I loved it. Praise the Lord. And what happened is I like to talk. And these alcoholics would call me on Sunday, and I would talk to them, and then I would finally say, oh, wait, I've got to get someone to come and get you and take you to an AA meeting. And then what they would usually say is, no, you're not going to get anyone to come and get me. You come and get me. I've been talking to you, God damn it, for about an hour, So you come and get me. And I said, well, it really doesn't work that way, but I'll come and get you. I didn't say no. So at the end of my shift, I'd have 3, 4, 5 alcoholics. And, and our big meeting Sunday night was Wilshire, Normandy. So I had that 73 Coupe de Ville. Now, I don't know about you, but that car was fabulous. Butter yellow with a white vinyl top, all white leather interior. It was one of the cleanest cars you ever saw. And there was so much room in the back seat and the front seat. And we didn't have seat belts in those days. And I used a lot of Armor All on the seats. And I'd go and pick these alcoholics up. Now, in the old days, they never stopped drinking until I got there. So I'd go and get them, and I would bring them out to the car. And, a lot of people didn't have Cadillacs in 1975, I'll tell you. And I remember bringing them to my car, and I would open that door. And if you remember the old Cadillac, they had lights in the ashtrays, under the floor, on the ceiling. And I would open that door, it would be like, hello, Dolly, and they would go, oh, my God. Is this a Cadillac? And I'd say, it is a Cadillac. They'd say, I've never been in a Cadillac. I say, well, you're going to be in a Cadillac now, and on your way to your first AA meeting. And they would pile in. I'd have 3 or 4 in the back seat, and 2 or 3 in the front seat. And I'd go barreling down Wilshire Boulevard, and we had power brakes in those days. And I remember I would just kind of barrel to the red light, and that light would change, and I would just tap that brake. And that car would stop on a dime. Unfortunately, the back end would kind of lift up a little bit. And they would just slide down. I remember looking in my rearview mirror one time and saying, oh, my God, where's those people? They're gone. No one's in the back seat. And they were all just intertwined. And 2 or 3 were under the dashboard. And I would go down Wilshire Boulevard. I'd ride by Wilshire, Normandy, and I'd go barreling around the corner, and that car would just kind of slide from one end. They would slide from one end to the next, and I'd always pull up in front of the meeting place. I'd always park in front, get out, go run around, open the door. I'd open that door, and I'd say, you're here at your first AA meeting, and they would be like in shock. They would be on the floor under the seat, like, oh, my God, but I did it. Some of them are still sober, believe it or not. And praise the Lord. You do what you got to do. And eventually, after 16 months of sobriety, I ended up in the Pacific Group. How much time do I have? Is anyone keeping track? A little boring? Okay, anyway. So I ended up in the Pacific Group, and the only, I don't know about you, but I have never been as high as I was that first year of sobriety. I was on that pink cloud. I was so glad to be here, honest. I was spared a lot. I was so glad to be here, and I loved AA, but after that 1 year, no one talked about the roller coaster. After that 1 year, it was like the roller coaster. You go up and down, and I was depressed and whatever. And I said to Molly, I said, every time I go to an AA meeting, I was really very depressed. I said, every time I go to a meeting, I hear these people, they're from this group called the Pacific Group. And they always say, come to our group, come to our group. And my friends in West Hollywood in those days said, don't you go to that Clancy group, he hates gay people. And I thought, well, maybe they don't know I'm gay, I look like Marlo Thomas in the old days. I was a brunette with a full bang. I'd have my hair in a flip. And my friends in West Hollywood said, you'll be the barbecue on Saturday. And I thought, oh my God, that's why they're inviting me. We're going to have gay Joe on a spigot in the yard somewhere. And I thought, oh my God. But what happened is, I went over there, and I had 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and finally one night, Clancy came up to me and said, Joe, he knew I wanted it. He knew I wanted sobriety. He said, Joe, remember, this is Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you want sobriety, we love to have you. And I kind of literally jumped into that group, and eventually I got Clint H. to be my sponsor. I couldn't deal with Clancy, but I got Clint H. to be my sponsor, and I loved Clancy, and I loved all the structure and everything, but I couldn't deal with him being my sponsor. And eventually, you do what you have to do, but, and people told me in the early days, because people were not talking about being gay, believe it or not, in 1975. It was not out. And Clancy, people would say to me, be yourself. They didn't want me to worry about it. And over the years, they've asked me, could you just tone it down a little bit? You know what I mean? They feel bad about it. But anyway, but the reality is I jumped into that group, and eventually I went to my sponsor. I was in West Hollywood. I said to Clint, I got to get out of West Hollywood. I just can't take it anymore. The bars and the streets, and it's just the way of life. I just can't. I'm in the bars. I can't let it go. He said, will you come to Venice? I said, I can't go to Venice. It's too far. He said, would you be willing to go halfway? And I said, yes. And anyway, halfway was Palms. I ended up in Palms one Saturday. That's how they do in the Pacific Group. 135 people submerged on my West Hollywood apartment. My sponsor said, you get the truck, which is as long as this meeting hall. I had a lot of furniture, and he said, you pack it and we're moving it. And within an hour, they were lifting stuff out of windows and lowering it, and I thought they're going to ruin all my beautiful things. Well, they didn't damage anything, and it ended up in Palms in a 1-bedroom apartment. And then eventually, my sponsor said to me, I was 3 years sober, and he said, Joe, you're doing real good. You're making good money now. And he said, you still have that money that your father left you. He turned me over to an AA realtor. And he said, sign nothing, but when you find it, you let me know. And we started looking for houses, and we were going all over. And eventually, believe it or not, a little house came available right around the corner from Clancy. And I bought it, and Clancy was beside himself. Oh, my God. Clancy, I'm your new neighbor. Hello. So, he couldn't believe it, And anyway, I jumped into that group. I loved the house. I had a lot of AA parties there, and we just had a ball. We had a ball. But what happened is eventually I left the Pacific Group. I was 8.5, almost 9 years sober, and I just wanted to get on. I wanted to make some changes. I got more involved in the gay groups and whatever. And I don't know about you, but in sobriety, I've kept myself real busy. My mother was a practicing alcoholic. Eventually, she was thrown out of Chicago. She came here. She couldn't get the program, and I finally ended up in Al-Anon for 5.5 years. And finally, my mother, believe it or not, she ended up back in Chicago through a lot of things. And she was like a tornado through our lives. And but my sister and I never gave her up. And what happened is eventually got sober in this home in Chicago. She was 70 years old, praise the Lord. She finally got it. I wish I would have saved the tape. This is how Alcoholics Anonymous work. I came home one day. I remember playing this tape. I love my mother. And I played this tape, and she said, she always called me Joseph. Joseph, it's your mother. I just want you to know I'm not taking any more pills and I'm not drinking. It's just too much work. And, and she stopped drinking and taking pills, and it was the best 3.5 years of our life with her because, and then she had a stroke. She had 2 strokes and eventually died. But it was fab. She loved my sobriety. She said, my son speaks all over the world. I said, oh, no, Ma, I don't do that. But anyway, it was great. I loved AA. What happened, too, was I started buying a little bit of, I don't know about you. I've never really been in another relationship, and I probably haven't had a date in 25 years and whatever. But the reality is I like buying. That keeps me motivated, and AA and whatever. So when my aunt died, that aunt and uncle had all the money. Well, I was going to get that $1 million trust fund, but unfortunately my aunt died before that crazy uncle of mine. So the Catholic Church got all the money and the furniture, and I was so depressed over that, I borrowed on that little house, and I bought a duplex closer to the beach. And then when another aunt was going to give me some money and that didn't materialize, I threw myself into debt again, and I bought a couple of more duplexes right next door to each other. And then a little where down the line, the real estate kind of went down the tubes for a while, and I lost one duplex, and eventually I ended up in a garage for about 7 years, one of my own garages, which looked fabulous. And then I was able to turn it all around, and eventually, that's how sobriety works. Sobriety works. And 3 years ago, I bought a new house. I managed to save like $85,000, and I walked into this house. I said, I think I'm ready to get out of that garage. And and I bought this new house, and I sold that old house, which I sold it for like $500,000. That $8,200, my father bought that house for me. I thank him. I said, thank you, God. Thank you, Dad, for that, because now it's $500,000. And I paid off my 2 duplexes, so now I'm somewhat retiring, and I'm drawing Social Security. I think it was mentioned here somewhere this weekend. And I'm get all the rents. I have 4 renters, 4 units. I get a lot of money every month, and I'm doing great. And it's all because of sobriety. I love sobriety. And, one day at a time, I stay sober. I've said it all. I don't know if you want, I love sobriety. I go to a lot of conventions. I do a lot of things. I do what I'm asked. I get commitments. I help new people. I do whatever I have to do. I don't drink. I don't take drugs. And, if you have any trouble with God, I'm an ex-Catholic. By the time I got here, and it was said here earlier by the speaker this afternoon, I felt God was out to get me. I was doomed. I was going to go to hell. I remember saying at the meeting one time, I was born a man. I couldn't cope with that. Then I was born gay, and now I'm an alcoholic. Why? Why do I have to get it all? But, that's just the way it was. And I remember I ended up in the Pacific group, and, I thought, and eventually I went back to the Catholic Church, and eventually I became a Buddhist, and then eventually I came back, and my religion's really in AA. Look at, we are a room full of miracles. You can go to Rome, you will never see these many miracles at the St. Petersburg, St. Peter's Cathedral. But look we're all miracles. Even if you were drinking before you came through the door, the fact that you're here tonight, you're a miracle. And I remember Clancy gave me one of these one Saturday, and he said, I don't usually buy people a glove, but I bought you one, goddammit. And I said, Clancy, did you forget I'm an ex-hairdresser? I do not play baseball. Can I play volleyball with the girls in the yard? No! He said, dummy, I want you far away from me. And I thought, God, he sounds like my father, and I put it on, and I remember going out to breakfast. I said, how far do you want me? Keep going! Keep going! And I kept turning around, and here, no, keep going. And eventually I kind of came to in the middle of Rose Avenue, between the 2 yellow lines, and I thought, the cars are going on both sides, and I thought, now this doesn't make sense. It's very humiliating. And then eventually he said, dummy, come a little closer. Come a little closer. And eventually I got a little closer and a little closer. And I don't know about you, but the reality is you have to take action. That's how Alcoholics Anonymous works. You put one foot in front of the other. And that's exactly how I played baseball. On blind faith. I always threw my hand up, but I always closed my eyes because I was terrified getting hit by that goddamn ball. And you know what? I used to wear a lot of Aquanet. I hate all that goddamn dust and dirt was blowing all over the field. It was humiliating. It was humiliating. And the reality, I always put my hand up. I always close my eyes. But I don't know if you've ever played baseball like that. But the reality is, if you cannot see it, when the ball comes through the air, I didn't know that then, but the balls make noise. I'd hear the ball, and the ball would I knew oh my God, the ball's coming, I could hear. I'd hear it whistling through the air, and the only thing I knew about when the ball got somewhere near me, I had so much super Aquanet on my hair I had a lot of hair in those days. My hair would kind of lift up. It would create a draft. And I would feel my hair kind of lifting up. I'd say, oh my God, the ball's getting closer. It's getting closer, and the ball would go, it would kind of fly over. My hair would go up, down. I'd think, oh, the ball just passed, and I'd turn around, and I'd run after that damn thing. Well, 3 years later, I had a sore back from bending over getting that goddamn ball. And one Saturday, I'm out there. I had my hand up, my eyes closed, and I heard that ball coming whistling through the air. And the next thing I know, I felt a little nudge in my glove. It was so powerful, it almost knocked me over. I went, oh! Oh, my God, it was, oh! I brought my other hand up. Oh! What is it? I opened my eyes. Now, bases were loaded. Those suckers were running real fast. A lot of dust and dirt was flying all over the field. And if you're a guy that used to live in West Hollywood, never did want to play baseball and never caught a ball, what do? I start jumping up and down saying, I caught the ball! I caught the ball! I could not believe it. And Clancy happened to be the pitcher that Saturday. And I remember when the dust settled, Clancy was standing there, "Hey, dummy!" Now, his face was blood red. He had more hair in those days. It was standing straight up like a beehive. He was so aggravated with me. And he yelled out, "Hey, dummy, when you catch the ball, you don't stand there and jump up and down and say, 'I caught the goddamn thing. Throw it!'" And I threw it with all my might. It was one of the slowest balls he ever waited for. I never did catch another. Eventually, I left the group. But you know what? I love sobriety. Thank you for making a 12-step call on me. Thank you. Thank you.